Hello, my name's Christina Hamilton. I'm the director of the Penny Stamps Distinguished Speaker Series at the University of Michigan Stamp School of Art and Design. For those of you who are here who do not know about the Penny Stamp Series, one word of explanation. The Penny Stamp Series is a free weekly lecture program that presents creative leaders and innovators. It takes place in downtown Ann Arbor at the Michigan Theater, one of our city's gems, every Thursday, September through April at 5:10 p.m., and it is free to the general public. I do have a few season calendars that are available on the information table, so if you don't yet have one, please do pick one up. We have some very exciting speakers coming up to finish up our season, so you won't want to miss it. So plan your Thursdays at 5:10 at the Michigan Theater. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Saki Mafundikwa, who has traveled the longest distance of anyone to be here today. He arrived last night from Zimbabwe. Yeah. Saki is the founder of ZIVA, which is the Zimbabwe Institute of Vigital Arts. Vigital is a word of his own creation, which refers to visual arts taught using digital tools. And ZIVA is a word that means knowledge from his native Shona language. And ZIVA is Zimbabwe's first school of graphic design and new media. And I just want to give you a little bit of background on Saki. Saki was born in Zimbabwe, and as a young man in the 1970s, because his country was at war, many of his peers were being drafted into the colonial army, and many of his other friends were joining up with the guerrilla forces to fight for liberation. He summoned up the courage to follow a different path. He actually journeyed to Botswana and declared himself a refugee, and he was able to secure scholarship funding to study in the United States. He studied at Indiana University, and then he went on to receive an MFA in graphic design from Yale. And then he established himself in New York City with a very successful career as an art director in publishing and advertising. And Saki says, sometimes you have to leave home to discover yourself. And he'd been away from his homeland for a very long time, and by 1997, he decided that he could do more good and be more useful in Zimbabwe than he could in New York. So he left his comfortable life, and he returned to his native land, and he opened ZIVA. The school illuminates graphic arts as a viable, creative, economic endeavor for Zimbabwe's young people, and Saki remains very committed to his country and his cause. It is his hope that Africa can imprint itself on the canon of graphic design, and he says the dream is for something to come out of Africa that is of Africa. So please welcome Saki Mafundikwa.
Good morning. I think it's still morning. It was a long walk from Harare to here. Very cold. But I'm very glad to be here today. Whenever I come to the Midwest, it's like a homecoming for me, because my introduction to the United States was the Midwest. I went to Indiana University, as you heard, so I'm a Hoosier at heart. Is Michigan still a Big Ten university? Or that's all in the past? Well, I feel a kinship with Michigan because both schools were Big Ten schools way back then. And by way of introduction to where I am from, I'm more used to a Mac, let's see. Okay, it works the same way. That's Zimbabwe right there. It's very important that I do this because unfortunately, geography is not one of your strengths. People talk about, where are you from? You say, Africa. You say, oh yeah, friends from Africa also. So you have to say I'm from Zimbabwe, which is a landlocked country somewhere sandwiched between a number of countries in the southern part of the continent. This is the city where I'm from. It's called Harare. It's also called the Sunshine City. And around September, October, the jacarandas are in bloom, and it becomes a city that Prince would definitely love. Zimbabwe comes from this ancient city built around the 12th century, and it means house is made of stone. And it's one of the wonders of the world. The Shona people built it, but nobody knows exactly how they did that. It's made from granite blocks that are hewed into brick-like shapes and put together without mortar. And it's an architectural wonder that still defies explanation as to how they did it. And because we are known as an oral society, oral tradition, we didn't leave any written records as to how they did that. But it still inspires a lot of pride in us that we did that. So, after studying at Indiana University, which I really enjoyed and loved my stay there, I'll talk a little bit more about that journey during my lecture this evening. And then going on to graduate school at Yale and working in New York City as an art director and teaching at Cooper Union at the same time, I felt that I had enough skill and chops to return home and make a difference. And so I went back home in '98 actually, and founded my country's first graphic design and new media college, and I called it ZIVA, which stands for the Zimbabwe Institute of Vigital Arts. The Vigital part was extremely important because without that, it could have just been ZIVA, the Zimbabwe Institute of Visual Arts. But I wanted to, from the outset, really define it as a center where we used digital tools. Because I was in New York when the whole new media thing, the whole technology thing came together. And I got drunk off of it. I was like a kid in a candy store. It was just a heady time, you know? And I really felt, okay, now I'm ready to go back home and make a difference. Very small, the school. I only take like 18 kids a year, and it's a 2-year program. My idea of a 4-year degree program quickly vanished when I discovered the fees needed by the government to start a university. So we scaled the scope down, but the dream is still alive. And I know it's taken 16 years and quite change around this area, you know, more gray there. When I went back, I would pull out the white hairs. Now I just don't care. Actually, I'm proud of it. They call me professor, so I think it makes me quite distinguished. So the other thing that I was able to do that I'm quite proud of is that in a country that used to be racially polarized, I have created a center where talented young Zimbabweans of all races come to get a creative education. So I'm quite proud of that, as you can see in this image of both streams of students, the first year and the second year class there. This was actually, I shot this during a workshop, a 1-week workshop that was run by a German poster designer. And he's at the back, towards the back. I don't have a pointer. Let me see. Oh yeah, this guy here. Gertz Gromlich. He's an amazing poster designer. And he worked with the students on the theme of education as a right. And these are the posters created by the students. The one on the left, I think, is self-explanatory. And then the one on the right, poverty is usually a barrier to education, especially in Africa. The one on the left there, education is the backbone of the people, and on the right, with education, you grow. A drought of education is no life, is the caption on the one on the left. And the one on the right was the winner in terms of the, because I think when Goetz came, he was looking for something African in inspiration. And as you can see, the spear becomes the pencil, and the book is the shield. This was a project given to us by WFP, the World Food Program, in conjunction with TNT, which is a Dutch courier. And it was aimed at long-distance truck drivers who were badly hit by the HIV/AIDS pandemic. And they created these wellness centers at border posts. So say a driver is coming from South Africa, they have to go through a Beit Bridge, which is the border post between South Africa and Zimbabwe. And they could go to a wellness center, and these wellness centers basically are converted containers that had a nurse and an aide and medication and information. So drivers could stop by there and get information about AIDS and HIV. And if they were on medication and they ran out, then they could get a refill at this center. And if they were too busy to stop, then you have the mobile unit here, which is a sprinter that plies the highways. And all they have to do if they see it is flash their windows, their lights, and then the van stops, and they get the same help as they would from the static center. So they came to us for the identity, including the name. The name that we came up with here, Nsewa, doesn't really mean anything. It just means North, South, East, West Africa. And we came up with a name like that because first we called it Welcome. Then we thought, well, what happens when they get to Angola or Mozambique where they speak Portuguese? Then it becomes Bienvenido, I think. And when they get to Francophone Africa, Bienvenue. And that would be a corporate identity nightmare because you have to change the identity in the different countries. So Nsewa, perfect. And the Harare City Library also came calling, and we gave the brief to our students to design the logo for it. And this is the one that they picked and the one they're using today. The one on the right, Aglo Power. Aglo is a company from South Africa that wants to come into Zimbabwe to help provide low-cost housing, because housing is a big problem in Zimbabwe. And they also came to us, and that's the logo that we designed. Typography is is crucial in our industry, especially in graphic design, because that's how we communicate. And also a very difficult subject for young people to grasp, for people in general. So how I deal with that is I introduce them by having the students create what I call a typeface design inspired by nature. And these are some of the solutions by my students. The one on the left is called Birds, and the one on the right is inspired by the cave paintings found in Zimbabwe. And of course, I wrote the book, African Alphabets. It's about the writing systems from different societies of Africa. And if you go to Amazon, you'll be amazed. It's one of the most expensive books in the world today. And that's because it's out of print. And I'm working tirelessly to get a publisher to put it back in publishing. My publisher went out of business without informing me. He said he couldn't handle the ebook revolution. This is just a spread from one of the a spread from the book. King Joya of the Bamum people in Cameroon, who invented a writing system that he called Shumom at the age of 25 in 1896. It's still in use today in Cameroon. We will end with some shots of the students at work at the college. I spoke at Tasmim in Qatar, in Doha, Qatar, and I met these two Americans who were teaching at Zayed University in Dubai. And they were so inspired by what we're doing that they offered to come at their own expense to run workshops with my students. And the guy ran a workshop on Maya. And at that point, we hadn't introduced 3D as part of our curriculum. We do now. And Betsy ran a workshop with the students in bookmaking. And this is a photo of her and some of the students with the books that they made. So we work with, anyone is free really to come to Ziva and work with the students. And that has happened a lot over the years. We also collaborate with universities from around the world because of the internet, you know. It makes it quite easy. And in order to qualify, the students have to produce a thesis. I think they're the only students in the world to do a 2-year program and then produce a thesis. But I insist on it, and it's a very good way of the students putting together everything that they have learned over the 2 years. And they choose their own topics. On the left, Maya is really into horse riding, and she created a training manual for horse riding. And on the right, my son, Simba, his interest was architecture, and that's his thesis right there. I'm proud to say that he's now a sophomore at SUNY Delhi, upstate New York, studying architecture and doing very well, made Dean's List last semester. Diet, very important, and in most of Africa, people are really fascinated with fast food. And in fact, unfortunately, KFC has just come to Zimbabwe. And yet we have our own traditional foods. And this student did her thesis on our traditional foods. And on the right, looking within, a topic that's very fundamental to my process. And those students who find it expensive to produce books because they're not cheap to produce, they make interactive CDs and DVDs using Director. Graduation is always the best time. We have a lot of fun. Parents proud when their kids make it, and we celebrate. Thank you very much.
We have a couple minutes for questions if anybody has questions for Saki, so you can keep the mic there. And if people want to come to the microphone over here, because Saki will not be here for our living room conversation later, though he will be speaking. He is the penny stamp speaker tonight at the Michigan Theater at 510 in Ann Arbor, and you're all invited to come there. Yes, sir.
Hi, Saki. Great presentation.
Thank you.
My name is Rick Robinson. I'm from Detroit. The intro said you were a farmer.
Yes.
Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, I guess it all goes back to how I was brought up. My father was a schoolmaster, and he also in Zimbabwe, you have two homes. You have your home in the city, because that's where your father works, or that's where you work, and then you have your rural home. So that's kind of how I grew up. I really enjoyed going home for the holidays to work on the land. And my father was pretty hardcore. He would wake us up at like 4 in the morning, to go and work in the fields. And we thought he was a brute, we really hated it. But now that I'm grown and have kids of my own, I really feel like that was a grounding. He gave me a grounding, a good foundation to find joy in labor and dignity in working, using your hands. So when I returned back home, I bought a piece of land. It's about 80 kilometers out of Harare, and it's the same, I would say, for people here who have a place up in the country where you escape to, over the weekend. I go to be among my cows and goats, and everything is organic. I've made a choice that I'm actually a sworn enemy of Monsanto. I know their tricks. They fool, especially African countries, with words like food security and all that. But what they don't do is reveal to the people the truth about how it's profit-driven and how it destroys the environment, the soil and the environment, and especially peasant farmers. I think we've seen it in India, because once you get hooked on it, it's like heroin. You are on it for life. You can't reuse the seed. Each year you have to buy new seed. Whereas if you're organic, you pick the best seed and you grow it again the next season. But also in America, I think the bees are dying. And they're dying from GMOs, chemicals like Roundup. People are unaware of this. And they're destroying the eco-balance, basically. So the land gives me that opportunity to do those things organically. When I lived in New York, I shopped at Trader Joe's. Now I'm Trader Joe's.
And, well, it seems like you're a farmer of students.
Yes, I see actually a direct correlation right there. When we talk about creativity, a lot of people think that creativity means sitting in a corner, like that guy over there in that corner there, drawing and doodling. That's what people think creativity is. That's why there's so much, opposition to it. That you want to teach our kids to draw and paint and things. How's that going to make them better scientists? But it's actually creativity and innovation are things that are taught from when you're young, if they are part of the school curriculum. It's a way of thinking creatively out of any situation. When the weather doesn't permit and you can't fly and you're stuck at an airport for hours, you can sit there and moan about your situation, or think creatively of how to deal with that time that you're over there. That's what we mean by introducing creativity and innovation thinking. Thank you.
I was wondering if you could share with us, what were your biggest challenges in getting the school started, and how did you creatively surmount them?
Yeah, well, the thing with us creative people sometimes is that we don't think like business people. So based on the training that we got, So I never thought of that. I just thought, I'm going back home to start a school. And how did I do that? I cashed in my KO1 investment and basically left with the family, wife screaming, what are we going to do in Africa? I said, we're going to Africa, and I'm going to just start a school, okay? And the smart thing I did was my kids were young. They were age 6 and 4. So they were not really set here. So it was an exciting adventure for them. Yeah, we're going to Zimbabwe. So do I regret it? Not at all. Have I attracted funding in 16 years? Not at all. But not through a lack of creative thinking, but through the government policies of my country. You know, nobody wants to fund anything in Zimbabwe. So I just did it on pretty much emotion. It's something I really felt I had to do, and nothing could stop me. And after 16 years of doing it, I still believe that it's going to turn into a university one day.
Actually, that segues perfectly into my question. How is your school funded? How do students find you, and do they pay fees?
Yeah, unfortunately, after working at Cooper Union for 3 years, you know, Cooper Union in those days, in the 90s, was tuition free. So I wanted to create my country's Cooper Union. Yeah, right. What I didn't, what I didn't reckon with is that Cooper Union, of course, has all this money, what do they call it, endowment funds and all that. And also Cooper Union, I think Peter Cooper's parents were quite wealthy and left him quite a hefty inheritance. And he was a Marxist, and he really believed that education had to be free for all talented New Yorkers. And so I thought I could use that model, but of course, my father was just a schoolmaster and a farmer, so pockets were not so deep. But so we had to charge fees. And we are still looking for funding, but it hasn't stopped the school.
For your question, Mike. And Margaret, I'm sorry, we're going to be out of time, but we'll do one more, and you could cut. No, Mike, you can ask, or whichever one. Mike is giving, what a gentleman, yeah. Thanks,
Yes.
Mike. Okay, Margaret.
Mike's my buddy, so we're here together. I really wanted to ask you about digital media. What excited you so much, and what programs you use to teach your kids with?
Well, Adobe Creative Suite. And Autodesk. Now we've introduced, well, let me just backtrack a little bit. I'm sorry I take too long to talk, but you know, I've come a long way, so I guess you can give me that kind of slack. For years, I would get students, because to enroll at Ziva, one has to produce a portfolio. And so a lot of kids would come in there with animation kind of portfolios, and I would unfortunately send them away. I would say, we don't offer that here. How I regret that, because now animation has become a really big business, part of the creative industries. And well, it's better late than never. Last year, we found out that Autodesk gives its software for free to schools. So we applied. It used to be you had to apply. And they really liked our story, and that we want to introduce this in the hope of, because as you know, Africa, I said at the top that we are regarded as a oral tradition society. So there are many stories to tell there. And yet our children are fed SpongeBob, you know, which has no cultural relevance to us. We could create something that could be of cultural relevance, not only to Zimbabwe, but to the world. So we now use Autodesk software, along with with the Creative Suite. So that's the software we use.
Okay, thank you so much, Saki, for coming all the way from Zimbabwe today. And thank you, everybody. I hope to see some of you at the Michigan Theater later today. And here's Deb before lunch.